4 years ago, I was reading an old Korean cookbook that a friend had brought back from Seoul, and I came across a sentence that made me stop and read it 3 times. It described an oil so rich in omega-3 fatty acids that 1 tablespoon contained more than what most people get from eating salmon twice a week. The oil came from a plant most Americans have walked past 1,000 times without knowing what it was. Worse than that, in many parts of the country, it has been officially labeled a noxious weed, sprayed with herbicide, ripped out of fence lines, and treated like an enemy of the pasture. I sat with that book for a long time that night because something did not add up. How can the same plant be a temple food in one culture and a roadside nuisance in another? That question sent me down a path that completely changed what I grow in my garden. The plant is called perilla. Its scientific name is Perilla frutescens, and it belongs to the mint family, which is why it has that square stem you can feel between your fingers when you snap a piece off. There are 2 main types you will run into. One has green leaves and is the type used heavily in Japanese cuisine, often called shiso. The other has deep purple, almost burgundy foliage, and that is the one Victorian gardeners in America fell in love with during the 1800s. They called it the beefsteak plant because the textured dark red leaves reminded them of a thick cut of meat sitting on a butcher's counter. For nearly 100 years, perilla lived in American gardens as a respected ornamental, traded between neighbors, shared at church picnics, and grown without anyone making much fuss about it. Then something shifted, and the shift had almost nothing to do with the plant itself. After the Second World War, American agriculture began a massive reorganization toward industrial monoculture. The soybean became king, corn became queen, and anything that did not fit neatly into a combine harvester or a herbicide spray program started getting pushed to the margins. Perilla, with its self-seeding habit and its preference for the edges of fields rather than the middle of them, was suddenly inconvenient. By the 1950s, agricultural extension offices began circulating warnings about it. They focused on a compound in the plant called perilla ketone, which can cause respiratory problems in cattle that graze on large quantities of it when pastures are dry and overgrazed. That concern was real for ranchers, but instead of teaching pasture management, the response was to label the entire species as a toxic invader and recommend its eradication. What got lost in all of that messaging was the nutritional profile of the plant itself, and the profile is genuinely remarkable. The seeds of perilla, the small round seeds that form on the flower spikes in late autumn, contain between 35 and 45% oil by weight. Of that oil, the alpha-linolenic acid content sits somewhere between 54 and 64%. Alpha-linolenic acid is the plant-based omega-3 fatty acid that the human body cannot manufacture on its own. To put those numbers next to something familiar, flaxseed, which is widely sold as the gold standard plant source of omega-3, contains around 55% ALA in its oil. Perilla matches it and often exceeds it. Compared to farm-raised salmon, which is the source most people associate with omega-3 fatty acids, the comparison becomes almost absurd. A tablespoon of cold-pressed perilla oil delivers more ALA than a typical serving of salmon delivers in EPA and DHA combined, though I should be honest about an important nuance here. The body converts ALA into EPA and DHA at a relatively low rate, somewhere between 5 and 10% for most people. So perilla oil is not a perfect one-to-one replacement for fish oil, but it is a powerful, accessible plant-based source that anyone can grow at home for the cost of a packet of seeds. What changed my mind about this plant was not just reading about it. It was growing it for the first time. I scattered a small handful of seeds in a corner of my garden that was getting too much shade for tomatoes. The soil there was tired, compacted, and I had pretty much given up on it. I did not till it. I did not amend it. I just brushed the seeds across the surface in late autumn and pressed them lightly with the back of a rake. Then I forgot about them, the same way I forgot about that yacon patch years earlier. Spring came, and one afternoon in May, I noticed dozens of small reddish-purple seedlings pushing up through the soil. By July, I had a waist-high stand of perilla with leaves the size of my hand, and the smell when you brushed against them was something between basil, anise, and cinnamon. It is a smell you do not forget. The reason perilla is so easy to grow comes down to how the seed wakes up. In nature, the seed drops in autumn, sits through the cold winter, and then germinates when the soil warms in spring. That cold period is called stratification, and it is what triggers the seed to break dormancy. If you try to plant fresh perilla seeds in pots indoors in February without giving them a cold period first, you will mostly get nothing. The seeds will sit there confused, waiting for a signal that never comes. The simplest solution is the one nature already designed. Sow them outdoors in late autumn or very early winter. Let the cold do its work, and watch them appear on their own schedule when conditions are right. If you missed the autumn window, you can mimic the cold period by placing the seeds in a small bag of slightly damp sand in your refrigerator for about 4 weeks before planting them out in spring. Another detail worth knowing is that perilla seeds have a short shelf life. Unlike tomato or pepper seeds, which can stay viable for years if stored properly, perilla seeds start losing germination strength within a year or 2. So if you buy a packet, use them that season or the next, and once you have established plants, save your own seeds from the autumn harvest. That way you never have to buy them again. A single mature plant can produce thousands of seeds, more than you will ever need for replanting, which leaves plenty to press for oil or share with neighbors. Once the plants are established, perilla is one of the lowest maintenance crops I have ever grown. It does not need rich soil. It does not need regular fertilizer. It tolerates partial shade, which is something I cannot say about most edible plants. In fact, in very hot summer climates, partial shade actually improves the quality of the leaves and keeps them from getting tough or bitter. It tolerates drought reasonably well once established, though if you want lush leaf production for culinary use, occasional watering during dry stretches will keep the plants tender. Pests largely leave it alone because the same essential oils that give perilla its distinctive aroma act as a natural insect repellent. I have grown it alongside cabbage and beans, and I have noticed that aphid pressure on nearby plants drops significantly when perilla is in the rotation. That is not just my observation. It is a documented effect in companion planting research. The leaves are where you will get your first real harvest, and they can be picked from early summer through the first frost. I like to take them in the morning, after the dew has dried but before the sun has cooked off the volatile oils. You can use them fresh in salads, where they add a peppery, slightly anise-like note that pairs beautifully with cucumbers, ripe tomatoes, and sesame oil. You can wrap them around rice and grilled vegetables the way Koreans do with samgyeopsal, using the leaf itself as a kind of edible plate. You can chop them into noodle dishes, blend them into pestos in place of basil, or layer them into sandwiches for a flavor unlike anything else in your kitchen. There is also a traditional Korean preparation called kaenipjangaji, where the leaves are stacked in layers and submerged in a brine of soy sauce, garlic, and chili. After a few weeks in the refrigerator, they become intensely savory, almost umami-rich, and they keep for months. The fermentation process actually amplifies some of the beneficial compounds in the leaves, particularly rosmarinic acid, which is one of the most studied anti-inflammatory polyphenols in plant science. Rosmarinic acid has been shown in multiple studies to reduce the histamine response associated with seasonal allergies, and perilla leaves contain it in concentrations that rival or exceed rosemary, which is where the compound got its name. Beyond rosmarinic acid, the leaves contain a compound called perillaldehyde, which is responsible for much of the plant's distinctive aroma. Perillaldehyde has documented antimicrobial activity, particularly against certain foodborne pathogens, which is one reason perilla leaves have traditionally been used to wrap fish and raw seafood in Japanese cuisine. It was not just for flavor. It was a practical food safety measure refined over centuries. The leaves also offer something interesting when compared to spinach, which most people consider the gold standard of leafy greens. Spinach is famous for its iron content, but it is also high in oxalates, compounds that can interfere with calcium absorption and contribute to kidney stones in susceptible individuals. Perilla leaves contain significantly lower levels of oxalates, which means the minerals in them, particularly calcium and magnesium, are more bioavailable. You get more of what you eat. For people who eat a lot of leafy greens, that difference matters over time. Now we come to the part that most home growers never reach. And it is the part that genuinely separates perilla from almost every other backyard crop. The seeds. In late summer, the plants send up tall flower spikes covered in small white or pale lavender blossoms. As autumn progresses, those flowers give way to clusters of tiny seeds tucked inside dry, papery husks. When the spikes turn brittle and brown, usually after the first light frost, the seeds are ready. I harvest by cutting the entire flower stalk and laying it upside down inside a paper bag for a week to finish drying. After that, I run my hand down each spike over a large bowl, and the seeds come tumbling out along with the dry husks. To separate them, you can use a method called winnowing. Take the mixture outside on a slightly breezy day and pour it slowly from one bowl into another. The light husks blow away in the wind, and the heavier seeds fall straight down. It is a technique that has not changed in thousands of years, and it works. A healthy, mature perilla plant can produce anywhere from a few ounces to nearly half a pound of clean seeds. Just a small patch, maybe 6 to 10 plants, can give you enough seeds to press a meaningful quantity of oil. For pressing at home, the best tool is a small stainless steel cold press machine. These are available online for a reasonable price, and they work for many small seeds, including sesame, sunflower, and pumpkin. The critical thing with perilla is to keep the temperature low during pressing. Alpha-linolenic acid is extremely sensitive to heat, and if the oil gets above roughly 120 degrees Fahrenheit, the omega-3 fatty acids begin to break down and oxidize. Industrial seed oil production uses high heat and chemical solvents to maximize extraction, which is exactly why most commercial seed oils are inferior to what you can make at home with patience and a low-temperature press. 1 kilogram of dried perilla seeds, about 2¼ pounds, will typically yield somewhere between 350 and 450 milliliters of oil, depending on the variety and how thoroughly the seeds were pressed. That is roughly 12 to 15 fluid ounces of finished oil from one good harvest. Once pressed, the oil should go immediately into dark glass bottles and into the refrigerator. Because it is so high in unsaturated fatty acids, it does not have the shelf stability of olive oil or other monounsaturated oils. Treat it the way you would treat fresh fish or fresh herbs. It is alive. It is meant to be used relatively quickly, not stored for years in a clear bottle on a sunny shelf. In the kitchen, perilla oil is never used for frying. The same heat sensitivity that requires cold pressing also means high heat. Cooking destroys the very nutrients you grew the plant for. Use it as a finishing oil. Drizzle it over warm rice. Whisk it into salad dressings. Pour a spoonful over steamed vegetables right before serving. Mix it into yogurt or hummus. The flavor is nutty, slightly grassy, with a faint sweetness that resembles a cross between toasted sesame oil and flax oil, but with more depth than either one. A single teaspoon a day, taken straight or worked into food, can dramatically shift the omega-3 profile of your overall diet without requiring you to buy a single supplement capsule. I do want to mention a few cautions because honest information matters more than enthusiasm. If you are pregnant or breastfeeding, there is limited clinical research on high consumption of perilla oil specifically, so moderation and a conversation with your doctor are wise. Perilla can have a mild sedative effect in some people, so if you are taking medications that depress the central nervous system or are scheduled for surgery, talk to a medical professional first. And as I mentioned earlier, the perilla ketone that caused problems for grazing cattle is something to be aware of if you have livestock. The compound is concentrated in the flowering stage and in stressed plants, and ruminants eating large quantities in dry overgrazed pastures are the population at risk. For human use of leaves and seeds in normal culinary quantities, there is no documented concern. When I look at perilla now after several years of growing it, what strikes me most is how much it represents a quiet pattern in modern agriculture. The plants that are easiest to grow, most nutritious, and most useful to ordinary households are often the ones that get pushed to the edges of our food system. They are not patentable. They are not profitable to ship across continents. They self-seed, which means you never have to buy them again after the first packet. A plant that gives you free oil, free greens, free seeds, and asks for almost nothing in return is not a plant that fits into a business model built on recurring sales. So it gets called a weed, sprayed off the roadsides, and forgotten by most of the public until someone in a library or a garden somewhere stumbles across an old book and starts asking the right questions. If you have a small patch of underused ground, a corner of the garden where nothing else seems happy, or even just a few large pots on a balcony, I would encourage you to try perilla this coming season. Scatter the seeds in late autumn. Forget about them through winter. Watch what happens in May. Pick the leaves all summer for cooking. Let the plants flower in late summer. Collect the seeds in autumn. And if you feel like going one step further, press a small bottle of the most nutritionally dense plant oil you can produce at home. Save seeds for next year. Share some with a neighbor who wants to try. That is how forgotten plants come back into the world. Not through a marketing campaign, not through a celebrity endorsement, but through one garden at a time and one harvest at a time. If you enjoy discovering crops the food system tried to forget, subscribe to the channel and join us in the next videos.